going to start looking. Sorry, we're going to start looking at some of the standards that have already been developed by each of you. So let's see, because it's always great to share. Because of time, Steve is going to go first. Steve, are you on?
I am.
All right, great. So I'm going to stop sharing and let you take over. Maybe you can share yours. And let me see if I can make you, Steve, more. All right, so how do I make Steve? I don't see here how I can actually make Steve.
Clay may have to do that.
Yeah, Clay probably has to do it, yeah. Clay, are you still with us?
Yeah, I'm still here. I'm just working on it. Let's see here.
Okay.
Okay, Steve. Trying to find Steve. He's dropped off my. Okay, there we go. Steve, you can do it now. Ready?
It's got the power.
All right. Well, there we go. I had everything pulled up, and for whatever reason, it came off. So let me find that file again. All right. Okay. So can everybody see the screen?
Yes, yes.
All right. So I condensed our accreditation handbook down for this just to our accreditation standards. We took our digital and distance standards and baked them in, so to speak, into our existing K-12 standards so that it looked similar. When we got into the conversations of philosophy and governance and data analysis and different things of that nature, and we took out and inserted the digital distance best practice conversations into where it was most acceptable and most practical. So you can see as we get into philosophy, when we talk about our statements of faith, sensitive to the needs of the pupils, then we get into things like the online service provider's stated mission communicates purpose. The mission and the vision, the goals are clearly articulated to the stakeholders. The program and the overall development of the schools is consistent with educational practices. So we went through, we took about 4 to 6 months to really dissect and pull apart what pieces of our K-12 brick and mortar were hallmark pieces for us that were the do or dies, and what pieces were the must-haves of our virtuals, and put them together. And that's how we wound up with our 11 virtual standards.
Steve?
Yes.
This one quick question. Are these standards for a standalone online school, or are they for a brick and mortar school that also has an online program? What's the context for your standards?
So these 11 standards are just for a standalone virtual school. Okay. I'll scroll down so that hopefully nobody gets seasick. These standards right here, which we call 5B, these are the addendums to our K-12 standards, where if a school has a brick and mortar, but also has an online program, they have these additional standards they have to answer to in addition to the K-12 brick and mortar standards. And you can see here at the top the definition: if an accredited school program utilizes any distance or digital program for more than 50% of the student's instructional time, they're required to use this additional addendum to their existing accreditation. So if a high school is, if the brick and mortar K-12, K through 8 is teacher directed instruction, but the 9-12 is virtual, then they have these. Or if the 9-12 50% is in person, 50% is online, they have to do these standards as well. But we've
So, Steve,
taken,
I think that's a really, really great, conversation point. So is it 50%? And I'm just going to pick on here because this is the kind of things that you'll get pushback on. Is it 50% of the time for the overall high school diploma? So in other words, I could do 2 full years and then I do the brick and mortar, or is it 50% in any given year? I think sometimes now we have to start clarifying or spelling those kinds of things out.
the intent, and I think you brought up a good point. The intention is 50% of your academic day,
Yeah.
which then would lead to year to year. Or if you're on a block schedule, and it was, you completed a course in a semester and you moved on to a different coursework. But that's the idea, is that if there's more than 50% of your day is spent in front of a computer screen having digital instruction, whether that be through a 7-Star Academy, through a Liberty University online, through Ignitia, through Illuminate Academy, whichever curriculum provider that the school is partnered with, then they would have to then have these additional standards put on top of theirs as well.
That's great. And, for those of you who are in faith-based school programs, this is a tremendous resource. The fact that Steve's already got this built out, it's already looks good. Steve, pop those back up again, because I think more than me will want you to actually walk through them. And I know your time's pressed, but I think you have about 15 more minutes to give us.
Perfect. So the standards, the brick and mortar, the full-blown standards, if you guys have been around NCPSA for any length of time, there was a set of NCPSA standards that were kind of online, virtual best practices. That was the beginnings of these standards. And then they have morphed and changed as we've grown, as we've discovered other opportunities. And then we melded them in with, like I said, with our existing K-12 brick and mortars. You can see that we actually, in this conversation, we baked in a conversation about school days, minimum seats and days and hours. This is one that there's an expectation, but when we go into a school that is an online program, if it's operating in a particular state or particular region, then we look and see what those particular guidelines or regulations allow for or don't allow for. So for example, in Ohio, the parents have to document seat time for a student when they're at home versus when they're in school. And there's other states where they don't have to. So then the school has to demonstrate how are they taking attendance, how are they not taking attendance as far as number of days, number of hours per school day. So we left that in there intentionally so that we couldn't have schools that were saying, okay, you can blow through, and I think we talked about this on Monday, where you can blow through the course in 7 days and have your entire school year done in a matter of 2 months or whatever the case may be.
Wanda has a question.
Go ahead.
Yeah, I do have a question on this, because one of the things that we try to encourage our schools to do is move more towards concept-based curriculum and instruction. So if the concepts, if you teach concept-based, you're able to move the students to learn what they need to learn in less than 180 days. I'm just wondering, what is the basis for validity for being hard-nosed about seat time? I don't mean unreasonably short.
I think you're right. Yeah, it's a great question, because I think you have to determine where you're going to put lines in the sand. And pre-COVID, 180 days or 170, 190, depending where you are, it's saying that they have to physically attend those days, and some states require that you document that. I think that that attendance rule is one way to look at it. but I wouldn't recommend this as a hard and fast, because nowadays in many states, it's absolutely acceptable to say, as long as you have attendance. So for example, in the state of Florida, private schools can get away with an attendance policy that says, and you know, I hate to be the one to admit it, but I actually had to take them to court and actually challenge this, challenge the rulings to get this created in the state of Florida. So Florida actually allows now the private school to say, this is my attendance policy. And if you establish what you want as attendance, then that is what the state accepts. So in our case, for example, when I had, you know, fully virtual schools and learning centers and so on using virtual curriculum in Florida, you know, I established an attendance policy that said that the completion of the work and or the documentation for online attendance, because the platforms gather that data and you can see someone's checking in, the participating, I actually didn't require a number of days. And the reason the state approved it and the state said it was okay was, you know, our case was built around the fact that in order to get funding in Florida's public schools, you simply have to count a student present for 2 days, one in each of the FTE periods, and they're awarded the full funding. So I said, you know, technically speaking, a kid can show up for 2 8-hour sessions and you get funded in the public school system. Why are you putting a different burden of proof on me? And so my school calendar may be 180 days, which is quite different to my attendance policy calendar. So you want to be able to show that you have a scheduled calendar with 180 days. However, how you record attendance in virtual or online classes can be different. And so the key to it is defining attendance in virtual or attendance in online classes will be determined by, and then you can say record keeping such as logging into the online system, completion of project-based assignments, or whatever it is that you define. But it is very important to clarify between my calendar, my scheduled online course may be 180 days worth of work. However, someone can accelerate through. And then what are those mechanisms for defining how long you want them to be on the class, how long, you know, let's face it, an online class, if someone can buzz through it in 2 days, good for them. You know, what kind of online class was that? So there should be stopgaps in play. You know, the teacher should at all times be controlling that progress. And if the teacher has that progress through, I'm not opening a test, for example, the tests get locked down, or, you know, I'm monitoring a test on the first Monday of every month, or whatever it is, if you want to put those artificial barriers in to completing the course, if there's rigorous enough and there are enough assignments and so on, someone won't blow through it in a time, but also expecting them to artificially take 180 days when maybe they can finish it in a quarter or finish it in whatever. Those are conversations that are really, really great to have. And Steve, thank you for pointing that one out to us.
Right. And you know, most of our schools are engaging with curriculum providers that are designing their curriculum for those number of days. They're not designing concept-based curriculum yet. I've heard some conversations about that kind of event in an online platform. They haven't, I don't know of any. If you guys know of any, I'd be interested to hear from them. But most of the curriculum providers they're broken into what would look more like a traditional period kind of schedule over X amount of days in a unit, X amount of units in a month, X amount of months in a school year. But there again, we've got wiggle room. If a school were to come to us and say, here's what the state law requires versus what you're looking at, then obviously we'll defer to what the state law and requirements are, much like it would be in a preschool setting with DCF requirements, DSS requirements, those kinds of things.
Yeah, Wanda?
It can almost be like a double-edged, it can almost be a double-edged sword there when it comes to the attendance and whether it's competency-based versus course-based, you know, full content course-based. Because what I have found, for example, here in Arizona, all the funding is based on minutes. It's based on minutes.
Yeah.
So technically, if you think about that business model, it's actually to my advantage to make the student do all the content. They're clocking more minutes. And in fact, it's almost to my advantage for them to fail, of course, because then they're going to clock even more minutes. And what I have found is many programs will not accelerate students through what I call extended credit earning opportunities, like work credit, dual credit, vocational credit, because they're not generating minutes for those students. And so everything that I've created has always been open entry, open exit, and competency based. And one program that does provide competency based delivery is Edgenuity. That does. And like you're saying, Trina, the key here is that you have evidence that the student mastered the objectives regardless of method that it was done, whether it was assessed or whether they took the lesson, and then have a documentation that shows that they hit those targeted lessons, which we do have, showing the diagnostic and what areas they did. And on top of that, we actually require a private proctoring company. The student must do a virtual proctoring for those assessments to ensure validity.
Yeah. I think Wanda had had a question, Wanda?
Yeah, just an additional follow-up. What role or what impact would it have on attendance what impact does standardized testing have on or play in actual attendance?
None here.
So if they're demonstrating that they're learning what they need to learn at every level, it doesn't have, through a standardized testing system, it doesn't have any impact on giving you more latitude in attendance.
I think it depends on the assessment system. Here we were doing end of course or end of year assessments based on the student completing a certain course regardless of grade level. So for instance, if a student was a 12th grader and completed Algebra 1, they took the state assessment for Algebra 1 because they completed that course. And so attendance didn't play into the standardized tests at all because it was just mandated by the state when you will give these tests and which test you will give based on course completion during a certain window of time. And that's it. It had nothing to do with actual attendance of the student. And then now we're moving more toward SAT, ACT for the standardized assessments.
Well, and in some cases, David, thank you. In some cases, for example, in Florida, the students do not take the state testing. They're not required to take state testing. So, but for accreditation purposes or other purposes, we always try to give them some kind of a test. And then it may have been, an incremental, such as the MAP, the NWEA MAP testing. And we did that beginning of the year, middle or January, and then again at the end before they finish, so you could show some kind of growth. And if that's the case, the way to include that in those strategies is when you're looking at, and Steve, I don't know if you did this or not, but one of the things we did, because all the Catholic schools would use that testing, is take a portion, you can take a portion of the grade and have that as the test prep or the testing days and so on. So you can actually build that into your calendar and have, and have that proctored or that monitored. You lock down all the browsers and everybody does their MAP testing virtually. So there's all kinds of ways to begin to include those things, but it is complex. And that's why, the conversation yesterday was, Rome wasn't built in a day, but you also have to understand that everything you're doing in your brick and mortar, you do, plus you have extra standards because the online makes it more complex. It's harder and more work to operate and supervise and monitor an online school than it is a brick and mortar school, because you've just got so many layers of complexity.
Yeah. Yes, we used to, just to let you know, we used to test, we had a program that had about a 2,000 student enrollment in our online program statewide. And we used to have to triage and test about 500 to 600 students statewide during the standardized testing period. So, and it had to be done physically. So just, it was a very arduous process.
I'm not in disagreement in anything that I'm hearing. I guess where my questions come from is, do we have to be careful that that our emphasis or our focus is on student learning and not on a certain level of time that they attend?
I would say so, but that's up to you as the accreditor to make that determination for your private school groups. You know, so there are state requirements if you're obliged or obligated under states. That's very different to, for example, what ACTS or what MSA or what you may do, Wanda. You know, I think that's the point of this conversation is you need to actually own this and determine what are you asking your schools to do. You know, we should be providing guidance, and NCPSA should be providing guidance to you in like this workshop and saying, okay, it actually behooves you to have these standards in place. And, you know, some of you have already developed them, and that's terrific. That's great that we have those now as a resource to provide out to others to have a look. And the goal is for you to be able to cut and paste and say, you know what, we don't have something about online or hybrid learning. Let's grab these. And so at least now we have something that has been tested, and we can put all of these samples into play as you then begin to have conversations. But I think that the whole purpose is to make everyone aware that this is now mainstream. Online and blended learning is mainstream. Standards that are out there for brick and mortar schools will not cover you. It's a different approach. You do need to have other standards in play. And, you know, we're here to help you get those standards. Steve, anything else? I've got the copy of the standards. I sent what you sent me over to Larry this morning so that we can give those to everybody else who's participating as well. But anything else that you'd like to highlight? Because I know you're actually on a site visit, and I really appreciate you joining us to do this morning.
No, you know, I'm happy to help once you guys look at the standards. If there's anything you guys have questions on, feel free to email me, call me, chat, however we can help each other. It's a fantastic opportunity. We've got 2 standalone digital schools in Texas. We've got one in Virginia. We've got one in Kansas, and we've got several that we've used the addendum for. So we've got several that have been in play, and the standards work well for us. So
do me a favor, pull up the addendum 1 second so that you can explain the difference between the two, and in 30 seconds, because I know you're busy.
Okay.
Well, first off, will you be here on Friday so that we can have a look at how you assess those, or are you tied up with your?
That's going to be because that's the last day, and I don't know
gotcha.
how much we'll have left to do
Okay.
to wrap up our visit. So that's going to be a game time decision. I won't know
Okay,
yet.
sounds good. All right.
So the addendum we've pulled out of the digital standards. These are some specific things that have to be addressed that are in addition to what the governance, for example, we'll just take standard 2 governance. When we're talking about, for example, budgeting in their 6-year plan, in their school improvement plan. Now we're talking about other items and things that they have to talk about in facilities and staffing and professional development that are over and above what they would do for a brick and mortar teacher that maybe they're not thinking about with a virtual staff member, or budgeting for technology and bandwidth and platforms. And so these standards are, the addendum standards are written in ways to drive them into other conversations that, like Trina, like you said, the brick and mortars don't fit. That we find in a true virtual school, the administrators and the governances are thinking about these things because they're living and breathing it.
Right.
But a K-12 who is kind of morphed into it or fell into it by accident because of COVID, and parents have said, hey, I want to keep my kid in this hybrid model. Will you keep supporting it? Yes, we'll do it. But they're kind of just clunking their way through it. They're not thinking about these things. So that's why we pulled these out in these addendum conversations. So So for example, standard 3, there's six more indicators that will add to the 18 indicators that they already have in their curriculum instruction. So it drives it to a finer point in, for example, synchronous versus asynchronous learning. Something that maybe a K-12 administrator who's used to face-to-face interaction hasn't really thought about. How is that going to be intentional rather than just happening as they move forward? Organizationally with school staff, how are you using third-party, ad hoc, purchase modules, those kinds of things. And one of the things that we're discovering, and I'll end with this, is the conversation of when you're staffing this hybrid model, are you staffing it with the teachers that are already teaching a full course load and you're asking them to teach an additional online class, or are you hiring a separate online staff? And if you're hiring a separate online staff, how do you ensure that the culture of your school is unified and the mission and the vision and the mindset of your brick and mortar is intentionally woven into your virtual school so that you don't wind up with a brick and mortar and a virtual school that have two separate identities? And I think that's the next iteration of conversations that we're going to be working through is, what does that look like? How do we make that happen so that these hybrid model schools don't become two distinct entities that are just happen to be living in the same building? So
really great contribution. Thank you so much for this today. And I hope we see you again on Friday. Good luck on your visit, your site visit.
Hopefully.
Where are you? Are you, which state are you in?
we're in Florida. I'm in
Oh, you're
Orlando.
in Florida. You're
Yep.
doing a school in Orlando? Ah,
Yep, we're in
good
Orlando.
luck. All
Yep.
right.
All right,
Enjoy
thank
the
you,
visit.
guys.
Thanks so much, Steve. Thank you.
Thank you, guys.
So the all of the documents, the addendum and the full set of standards that Steve shared this morning, or this afternoon, sorry, I've lost track of time. We have, and I sent those to Larry. So Larry, those are available for everybody. Feel free to use them. They're a real asset for us to use as a building block. And as he said, those were built upon the first set of standards that that this organization, NCPSA, had developed as guiding best practices. So Larry, I think what we'll do is we'll leave you to the end to look at those sets of guiding best practices that these were built from. And I think then we'll go to David in Arizona. Maybe you can do just the same thing, share the standards and how you got there and what resources and stuff that you have available so that the team gets a different perspective from ACTS.
That sounds good.
We got to let you, maybe Clay can make you the host, right?
Yep,
Working on it.
no worries.
Thank you.
Done. All you, David.
Okay. Where am I at here? Let me find it. Okay. There we go. Let's see here. Let's go here. Let me get the right one here. Where am I at? This is the one I want, if it'll go. It's not coming up for some reason. Are you able to see my screen? No.
Yes, sir.
You can see it. Okay.
Yeah.
All right. So just a little history. In 2009 is when Arizona's virtual school program was locked down, just totally locked down in legislation for about 12 years. You couldn't even apply unless it went through an amendment to legislation. Finally, in 2009-10, they broke open the application process for districts to apply to be a virtual program here in the state. As you know, what was going on in 2008 was the recession. So there was a lot of reduction. So they were dragging their feet on writing the application. So I actually was one of the major drafters of this application to promote getting this thing moving forward. So my own program at the time could apply for a virtual school. And so a lot of what we just saw is very similar to what the components that are involved. The application is not huge, but it is for a district. It basically is an application. For a charter school, it's basically an amendment to their charter. That's how they do it. And as I said on Monday, as far as private virtual, there's almost no oversight here for private virtual programs other than accreditation. So this would be basically geared toward a publicly funded program. And if you're a charter, you would have to be an established charter in good standing with the state to be even approved.
David, let me stop you there for a second. What this goes to mind is, as accreditors, are you going to require just a substantive change form? Or is there a full application like you would for applying to launch a new school? So, that's if someone's going to have a virtual school, are you going to just ask them to do a change form? I think that's what most of us are using right now for adding programs or doing things as an existing school, or will we have a separate application for someone that wants to launch an online school? Now, you've got a lot of people launch them or launch virtual versions of themselves during the pandemic. And so the question is, whatever you decide, is it retro, or are you going to have people go back through a process now that you will be defining a process? So just keep that tucked in the back of your mind. And then also with David's application here, which is very thorough, being a state application, those of you who fall under having to meet state criteria or federal rules and so on, this will be probably more intense than what you see with ACTS, which had its own, flexibility. So private schools will have more flexibility than this, but this is pretty darn thorough. So, sorry, Dave, so go ahead.
No problem. And I have helped write and established and successfully done 4 of these applications with 4 different programs over the last 10, 12 years. And a side note here too, this application, since I originally helped draft it in 2009-10, has not changed a bit. It has not changed really at all since it was originally drafted. Here's a quick side note here. And what this is where a school can apply for the instructional time model flexibility program, which means they can actually apply to do partial virtual learning for their school, but not fully apply to be a virtual school. And that kind of popped its head up during COVID, of course. So it's a way to get to do online, but not quite go through as much rigorous process as becoming a virtual program. In other words, having your own school code just for the virtual program. Very simply, your title page, they go through all that. And then very simply, they go into the introduction, your needs, why do you want it? What's your philosophy? What's your instructional program like? How are you going to implement it? What's your leadership like? Accessibility. How are they going to get it? There is no requirement here in this state to provide internet or hardware. It's not part of the requirements of a virtual program here. How are you going to enroll them?
Sorry, David, let me interrupt you. Is everybody else, are you scrolling on pages? Because I'm still stuck on the chart. Is everybody else seeing him move through pages? It could well be me.
Okay, so are you seeing that or this? My problem is I'm not sure what you're seeing because I can't see what you're seeing.
I'm just seeing it says a school name and it looks like 4 blocks.
Yeah, we just have the chart.
The chart.
Oh, that's the rubric. Okay, so now I know what screen you're seeing. Oh, yeah, there it is. This is what I'm talking about.
Okay.
There's your application. Sorry about that. Normally I see like a border around my screen to know which one is projecting, but it's not showing me that. Okay. So anyway, this is what I was talking about as far as this here about a district being able to apply to do virtual, but not go through the process. And so you now have to do this entire application. So again, very simply, they go through a full cover page. Then your introduction. Why do you want a virtual school? What's your philosophy? What's your instructional program look like? And then, of course, under each one is very thorough bullets or points that they want you to hit. How are you going to implement it? What's your leadership look like, your governance? How are they going to get hold of it? What's the accessibility? And I said, this is important because there is no requirement to provide accessibility to students in a virtual program in this state. So that becomes tricky as far as your requirements. How are you going to enroll them? So what measures, primarily what they're concerned about here is how are you going to ensure they're a resident of Illinois, of Arizona, to be able to collect funding? That's their main requirement. Because that can get a little sticky at times, as you know, when you're doing virtual. Number 3, they get very heavily into the depth and breadth of the curriculum choices. What's your evaluation criteria? The extent to which the program offers a comprehensive program, offers a variety of comprehensive courses, and it goes in that you honor dual honors, AP. The course offerings prepare for post-secondary success. So they want all these components as part of the online program of your application. Then I described your educational methodologies employed by the school. What the extent to which the AL program's educational methodology includes computer-assisted learning, virtual classrooms, virtual laboratories, education, electronic field trips. So they want to know how you're going to address all these different pieces of virtual learning, not just, as we said, throw a course at them and say, do it. So
Well, and the really nice thing about this is, even though this was designed to launch a state-approved virtual school, the questions here could be part of your substantive change form if somebody wants to launch a virtual school, if we're just going to do the form, because this gives you the research-based questions, all of the things that you may not even think about. But, so this kind of thing is, it's a really great resource and tool, because even though we may not want all of the items, you may then also have, for example, if you've got a faith-based component, you might want to say, in this curriculum analysis, how are you going to maintain the culture of the school? How are you going to maintain and ensure that this is, meets your mission, vision, and standards?
Exactly.
You can simply add or fine tune. You don't have to start from scratch, because these things have been around. Lots of people and brains and organizations, whether we've been involved in them or not, or others, but there's a lot of other people have put a decade worth of work into creating this kind of stuff. So it's available. And, David, thanks for sharing this, but this is certainly something we can use.
Yeah, I think that you're right on that, this type of document or these type of standards, to me, could very easily be modified and molded into whatever type of program that you're trying to establish, and then expand or reduce what you want. If it's a, obviously if it's a private tuition-based program, you're in a different situation as far as seat time and attendance and funding and all that other stuff, as you just talked about.
But what questions like this do, it really forces an administrator who's thinking they're going to add these components to the school. It forces them to think through the structure of their program. And so it helps them to understand, first of all, that this is a huge task. You're not just sticking people in an online course. You thought about all the mechanisms and everything there,
And they also want to know right here, how are you going to address learning styles? How are you going to be able to modify content if you need to for 504s, ESS, whatever the situation is, second language students? How are you going to address all these subgroups, so to speak? They want to know that methods to provide synchronous and asynchronous support. Not just, again, throw them a link, here's your course and work on it. How are you going to support them in synchronous methods? Learning support systems, how are you going to help them? What are you going to do? What resources are you going to have? And then what methodologies are you using, basically? So they really do talk about things like research-based, what are you using to validate what you want to do, what you're trying to do, not just we think it'd be good, not if we think it would work. 5, describe the availability of internet or private network to safeguard pupils against predatory pornographic elements. So if, in other words, if you're using an LMS, what has that LMS done to address this if that student is working online?
Any thoughts at this point? Does anybody have any questions or any thoughts? Larry, I
Lindy?
see you have turned off your mute button. Are you questions?
No, we will provide all of this to each of you. If David can send it to me,
Absolutely.
then I'll make a
Absolutely.
folder and make it available to each of you.
Absolutely. And then they want to know, how are you going to how about the availability of filtered research access to the internet? In other words, what's very important with an LMS that I've found is the more self-contained it is and the better that they're able to support the student within the LMS rather than sending them all over the www, the better. The better. And the ones that I've had the most issues with are the ones that do exactly that. They start sending you off into Mars and Venus and links all over the place. And before you know it, the student doesn't even remember what the heck their objective was in the lesson. Number 7, describe the availability of private individual electronic mail. So they want you to tell them how the communication is done and how is it kept confidential. How is it kept confidential? 8,
Yeah.
describe the select. Now they get into PD. How are you going to select and how are you going to train your teachers? They want to know specifically, how is that going to work? What's that going to look like? How do you know they're competent? That kind of thing. And as we know, that's a problem in many cases where, as you were talking about, we were just talking about, they're doing a regular school and all of a sudden they want to do online and they just say, okay, teachers, you've got a course. You're teaching online now, which I have seen happen. Yeah, I have seen that happen. 9, describe the school's current partnership with universities, community colleges, and private businesses. So they want you to tell them how you intend to, or currently what partnerships do you have with the community to support those students as far as jobs, service learning, dual credit, vocational programs, certification programs, things like that you have partnered with, like college career readiness, basically. Who have you partnered with to support those services? Number 10, describe the services offered to the basically developmentally disabled, which now is ESS. So how are you going to support that group? What are you going to do to support the exceptional student? 11, describe the policies and procedures to ensure the academic integrity. So they want to know, how are you going to ensure integrity, which we've talked about already just in our short time together extensively. How do you know? How do you know they're doing it? How do you know it's valid? How do you know they're learning? How do you know they're meeting the objectives? 12, describe the goals of the AOI school program. And they get into specifics here. So what are your goals with the program? And last but not least, they do a statement of assurances, which could very easily be also created by an accreditor. But this obviously is for them. And it just gets into specific assurances that they want you to sign. And this statement of assurances is reestablished every year. And part of the statement of assurances is, how are you going to report? How are you going to collect and report attendance? That's one of the statement of assurance. How are you going to do that? And so basically what they're telling you is there is no set standard as to how you document that the kid is attending and participating, in other words, attendance, but you need to tell them how you're going to do it. What is your method to manage attendance and monitor it? And that's basically, and one of the major things about this program too, which I always liked, is by statute, if a student is not successful in a virtual school for whatever reason, it is the obligation of the administration of the school to meet and determine, is that placement even valid? Is that even an appropriate placement for that student? And that's written right in statute. They can't just throw the kid in there and let them flounder. And so they put responsibility back on the virtual school, saying, well, you got a student that's struggling and not making it. You might want to look at it. Is this really a good place for them?
Well, and that draws us back, David, to the question of, eligibility for participation. What is the enrollment criteria? And as the accreditor, you don't need to define that. You just need to make sure that the schools define that. So one of the standards will be to identify, does the school have enrollment criteria that is appropriate not only for the brick and mortar, but do they have enrollment criteria for the online school? And so,
yeah. And on top of this, then as I explained, I think to Trina when we talked at first, once this is done, it goes through the executive director's office for some substantive review of completion of just this part. And then once it gets through that review, the organization applying is required to go to a 3-hour demonstration. Here it's with an independent panel at Rio Salado Community College here in Phoenix, and they are required to do a 3-hour demonstration of their application. They have to show this. They can't just say I have it. They have to actually demonstrate everything that's been put in this application. How are you going to service it? How are you going to have secure internet? How are you going to have communications? And that all has to be demonstrated over a 3-hour demonstration. And the fee to the school to do that is $3,000 they pay, which then supports that independent reviewer is what they do. And I do have the rubric if you want to get into that today, Trina, or wait, it's up to you.
well, so I think let's take some questions right now, so that if you can stop sharing them, we can all see who else is on here.
Absolutely.
So this is a really excellent tool to use when you make the question as the accrediting organization. You ask the question, you have to first answer your own question. Is it going to be a substantive change form that I'm going to ask people to do, or are they going to do an application in order to, sorry, looks like Josh got dropped out. So am I going to have them do just a change form and allow them to launch the online school? Or are we going to have them do a change form and complete an application? So just like you were launching a whole new school. So I think that's step one, is determining that. And these organizations will, that'll be, that's on the organization to determine that. Larry, any thoughts, or Clay, any thoughts on that before we open up for some questions?
No, I think it's really, you made good points, and thank you, David, for sharing what you have.
You're welcome.
And you'll find as we look through these different standards, you'll find they're pretty much,
They are.
Equivalent. You use a few different words than somebody else will use, but yet the basic headings are going to be about the same.
I agree. Larry. That's what I've found so far in everything I've seen.
Yeah, so really, there's no point in trying to reinvent the wheel, I guess, is the
That's right.
purpose of this meeting,
Nope.
as well as to say there's a lot of standards already written. Some of them will be applicable for you and your organization, others won't. And you just can disregard those. But it's really good to see them, to look at what everybody else is doing, because then it may trigger thoughts and say, oh, I didn't even think about that. Do I need a standard for this, or do I not? Do I need to open up that can of worms, or do I not? So there are things that you're better off not even having something on because nobody's challenging it. On the other hand, there are things that you've got to have a standard around so that you protect the organization and the integrity of the online programs.
But just
I
like,
think, oh, go ahead, Larry, go ahead.
just like you
Larry.
can't take a brick and mortar teacher and throw them into an online classroom and expect them, you have to do some professional development to help them learn how to do that. Just like that, you cannot take brick and mortar standards and assume that they're going to be the same for distance education. So you really have to have, that's what this whole seminar is about, is you have to have very specific standards for distance education.
Well, to give you an example that was funny, I was working in an alternative program about 10 years ago, and it was a blended program. And I wanted tablets for my teachers so that they could go around and help the students. And I was getting resistance, so to speak, on getting tablets. And so I had to actually write a white paper on the correlation of proximity in the classroom to behavior and learning. And once I wrote this 2-page white paper validating why the teacher being next to the student with a tablet that helped them was way more beneficial for behavior and academically, I got my tablets without any problem. And I have a saying that I always use with my teachers: teach from your feet, not your seat. That was always my line, because many teachers, unfortunately, in a blended program, as you know, and this is what it was for me, the poor teacher's stuck in the corner with their desktop or their laptop, and you got a room that's 900 square feet, 40 stations in it, and you're trying to monitor and keep everything under control. And it's just almost virtually impossible to do that unless you're able to be mobile.
David, you bring up some really good points. One of the things that we have to be very cognizant of is the pandemic forced everybody to have an online version of themselves. But that is not online learning. That is not quality online education. That is distance learning by default. And we had the classroom teacher use the textbooks, use the books she had, use our online resources, HMH Online, and whatever else that they had, and put those into Google Classrooms and so on. But that is not quality online schools. That is emergency distance learning. And so that there's a very big difference between the results you will get and the quality of instruction and everything else when you have a program that is by design for online. So we just have to be very aware that people may have been successful. We may have been able to stand in a classroom and Zoom and swivel and have some kids in the room and some kids online, but that is not optimum for online programs. And that's why just looking at these standards and looking at all of these things that are out there, including some rubrics for scoring, some of those things like David was able to share, and that Steve had from ACTS before he had to drop, those are really, really strong. They give you a great foundation. So you can pick and choose from those documents that have already been designed. We're at the 1 hour mark. So I'm going to give everybody 5 minutes for a quick break. Grab your tea, grab your coffee, grab what you need. And then when we come back in again, we'll have a look. Is Dan on or from Middle States? Anybody from Middle States?
I didn't see Dan on the call.
No.
Or anybody else I recognize from Middle States.
So he's provided us with the standards that they have. So Larry, we'll just use those, put those into the file. And when we come back, we'll look at teachers and the standards. Yesterday, we looked at the standards for online programs. We looked at the standards for online courses. We'll come back after with a cup of tea or coffee and in 5 minutes, begin to look at quality online teaching. And, we'll start there, and then we can wrap it up with any questions that anybody may have or any support you may need, because I presume that some of you also have started to write these standards. It may be as generic as I've got 5 standards that say schools need to be addressing these things, but we want to have a look at that and dig in. So when we get back, oh, Larry, what I didn't do was the original standards that were from NCPSA. So maybe we'll start with that and then we'll move over to the teacher standards. All right. So 5 minutes, everybody. Grab your teas and your coffees.
Yeah, I think we're ready to move ahead.
Sounds good.
So let me share with you NCPSA's standards and best practices. Let me give you some background. Dr. Grunwald and I basically worked together for the last, what, Jim, it's been 15 years on this.
Yeah, it's been about that long, and we
Yeah.
didn't really start from scratch either. We did have some other previous documents that we did take a look at.
Yeah, so in my former organization, I chaired a committee called Technology and Distance Education. And we really put together the first best practices document and many other documents that you'll see here. But Jim and I worked many times. It was the only the two of us that in our meetings, in our commission meetings. And so we got a lot of work done on this. Let me show you, if you look at technology and distance education, you can see here's the best practices document. Can you see that?
Yes, sir.
Okay. So this document probably is the core of everything that we've done in NCPSA. It really talks about what are the best practices in distance education for anybody. And based on the best practices, we then built standards. It was not the role of NCPSA to go into all of the indicators of implementation, but we did do some of that. If you start sharing. If you, let me see here. If you go into that, here are the standards that we built. And let me show you one thing here at the bottom that became very apparent to us early on. Is you have to define what a school is, because there's a difference between a school and a content provider. And sometimes those lines get blurred a little bit. And you say, well, I'm getting my content from this provider and they are the school. Well, we defined what a school is, both for brick and mortar and for distance education. So you have to have an administrative unit, has to be a legal entity, is a learning provider imparting skills, is a provider of services, is not simply a home-based. So you have all of the whole issue of homeschooling. Is a homeschool a school in our definition? So we came up with these 10 points, and that's been very helpful to define what a school is. So we built these 6 basic standards that are the basis for all the standards for NCPSA. But we do have standards and indicators of implementation. You can find those on the NCPSA website as well. So those are resources that you can use, that you can pull up. If we can help with that, let us know. We're going to also put a lot of this information on the NCPSA Technology and Distance Education site so that you can get David's standards and Steve's standards and be an easy place to find all of those things. Comments, questions, or accusations?
Hold on those.
All right.
Thanks, Larry. So I see that Josh was in. Josh, I believe you sat beside me at the January meeting, and you were one of the reasons why we put this workshop together, is that you were embarking on this task. Have you any thoughts or any comments, or have you managed to push your progress further, or are you finding this helpful, I guess?
Well, this is very helpful. I've actually been waiting for this seminar to kind of get us started, and then I'm gonna put together our standards for our summit coming up in September, so that we can get these all into process.
Oh, that's terrific. That's good. Anybody else working on these right now? And then I'll explain why, what we're going to do right now. So Wanda, you're as well, your team is? You're
Yeah, there we go. Correct. And this is extremely helpful to me. It's really helping to answer a lot of my questions and giving me some clarity and direction.
Oh, that's great. That's good. You know, our goal coming out of that meeting in January was to be able to provide some resources and some assistance. And we're here. So if you need us, or you need us to do an all-day session with you privately, whatever it is, you know, that's the expertise that I'm glad we're able to bring to the table. Jim, Larry referenced you in his presentation. Any feedback or any updates or anything from you as well? Since obviously you've had some expertise in this area.
Well, as Larry said, he and I spent many sessions together with just the two of us going through these items. And so I really don't have anything to add to that, but yeah, we're always willing to help other organizations put their standards together too.
Yeah, it's one of those things, thanks, Jim. I think it's one of those things where they're constantly being revised, and the pandemic really just exacerbated some of the issues and some of the things and brought them to everybody's awareness. And now we know we need to have us, you know, not just a set of standards that are posted, but we actually need to be able to live and breathe and actually engage with some of that early work that was done. It's all still relevant, you know, whether it was David, Jim, Larry, or others who put these together and continue to work and revise those over a decade. The standards are all still there. Just because some schools now are new to the world of online or blended learning doesn't mean that the research base behind those kinds of delivery, that modality is, it's been around for quite some time. And so there is, we're lucky. Look at out of this group, the expertise that's just sitting here on this, you know, on this thing. So take advantage. You've got a lot of people that you're friends with here in the group, and do take advantage of having access to those resources.
Joe, did you have a comment or question?
Oh yeah, Joe's got his hand up.
Nope, I guess not.
No, it's just got his hand raised.
Yeah.
I can make a quick comment. One more quick comment is that this has been so comprehensive and so appreciated. I apologize for not being on video right now. I had to run to get a tire switched off real quick. So that's why my video is off at the moment.
No worries at all. We're just glad that you're hanging in there with us. I saw a couple of others left comments. They either are in they're doing an evaluation, or they're with a school site visit, or had another commitment and I'll be back on Friday. But the bottom line is we're putting all of the materials together so that you have those, and those are, you know, yours to use as much as you can. And we can help you using those. You will be getting CEUs as well because of the relationship with NCPSA and Global Ed for those. And then if you decide to build your sets of standards, there will be, it's called a project. I think Larry is the professor, Dr. Blackmer is the professor, who will actually be awarding CEUs for completion of that project as well, because we know writing these standards is not a 5-minute thing. So, you know, you're entitled to the CEUs from NCPSA to be able to do that work. So if there are other people helping you as well, when we get to the May meeting, we'll be able to kind of pull together and look at who else should be engaging in that and begin to offer those CEUs. So let me share this with you. I said we'd move in and have a look at the standards for online teaching. And so remember, I'm back at that same website I talked about yesterday and gave you the reference to, the NSQOL, the National Standards of Quality for Online.org. And I picked up on the standards for online teaching. And if you recall, yesterday we had standards for online programs and then standards for online courses. These are the standards for online teaching. And as accreditors, you know, we just want to say that they will have standards. And you may reference this document even in that descriptor if you want to say that your teachers are meeting these particular standards. So if you have a look here, they begin, there's introductions on, I won't do that because you can look at it yourself. But the professional responsibilities. So, you know, you got 9 standards here. And if you look at these are really close to probably the fact that you have professional responsibilities in a brick and mortar. And so these are the kinds of standards, but it's specific, it becomes more specific. So the online teacher demonstrates knowledge of the role of online learning in preparing learners to participate as global citizens, time management strategies. You know, this time management for the students is the #1 reason why kids will fail online classes, is that they think they can leave it all to the end, or they think that because something is online, that they don't have to actually go read a book or do whatever the other pieces are in the course. So really teaching and making sure the kids understand effective time management. So things like this, the teacher models digital citizenship. You know, do we have a definition of that? Is that something that you want to define, or do you want to take the definition that is fairly a standard one? We can look at Quality Matters, we can look at ISTE. There's a lot of organizations that have defined this. And it really is about use of tools, ethical behaviors online, and putting some of those things into practice. You know, is there accurate recording of the information online? So if I don't have the ability to have a conference call with you by picking up my phone or walking down to the guidance office, how else am I accessing those records? And is the teacher keeping up to date? You know, that's the #1 killer for the teacher-student relationship or teacher-parent relationship in online. Very often is, if it's not automatic, auto grading, you know, multiple choice and so on, is the teacher staying up with it? You know, do you have a policy for how often grades are turned in and so on? So to help the teacher manage their time online. So accuracy of records, those kind of things. In an online environment, you can't be waiting 3 or 4 weeks to turn back an assignment, because very often the student can't make progress unless certain boxes are checked. So really helping teachers understand their professional responsibility in an online environment is quite different to in a brick and mortar. Because in the brick and mortar, I can talk to you in the classroom door and say, oh no, Mary, you won't get that essay until next Wednesday. So I have to have that consistent relationship building in an online environment as well. Does the online teacher meet professional teaching standards and have credentials in the field? You know, sometimes our content providers have people who are just degreed, or maybe not even degreed, but they need to meet teaching standards for teaching their subject matter. Then they also need to have teaching standards or endorsements or other things that help us with academic credentials to say that they're qualified, that they've studied how to teach online. And Larry, for example, can talk. Larry, do you have 2 minutes to talk about the fact that you're training I know you're teaching a group of college professors just so that the college can post on their website that all of their teachers are not only qualified to teach the content, but are qualified to teach in this new environment. Did I get that right, Larry? You're on mute. You're on mute, Larry.
Yeah, we have about 30 professors in a new college that are trying to transition from a face-to-face college to an online college. And so they are requiring every professor to be credentialed in online learning. And so through Global Ed Foundation, we have a course, and we are teaching that. It's my privilege to teach that course. And the results from college professors at the end of that course, when we do the course evaluation, it's amazing how many of those teachers, those professors have been teaching for 20, 30 years, but had no idea how to teach online. And they said it's been so helpful to actually go through a course to how to teach online. And so, you know, that's something that we can make available to any of your organizations, is that course.
Absolutely. Jim?
Yeah, I wanted to stress that same point. When we're looking for new instructors for Amazing Grace Virtual Academy, and I will ask them, well, what kind of experience do they have with online teaching? And of course, it reverts back to emergency online teaching during COVID, thinking that that somehow cuts it. But we too, and I was the director of academic computing for Martin Luther College for a number of years. And there too, we require 6 graduate credits for any online instructor. So they take a course in teaching online, and then another course in designing and constructing online courses.
That's great. I know that the program that Larry was talking about for the college professors is pretty extensive. It's an actual endorsement. It's a certification program for people who are already certified or already have degrees, to add an endorsement for that to be a certified global online instructor. But we do have classes that we actually will give them free as part of the relationship for NCPSA. Some of those classes, just introducing online classes and so on. If your instructors want them, there'll be somebody there in the May meeting where you can just sign your people up and get a code, so that if you want people to take those and get some CEUs and really improve their skills, those are available as part of the relationship. So it's really important that we don't confuse, like you say, Jim, we don't confuse what we did during an emergency situation with really strong online pedagogy. You know, it's so important that we really start to look at some of these things. One of the other things here is, you know, the online teacher serves as ambassador of knowledge to the stakeholders. You know, is your online environment beginning to build out a professional learning community? Are your online teachers beginning to help work and manage and support the blended learning going on campus? Are they also training parents? Are they training other people that are facilitating the learning experience for the students, especially if you're doing early, you know, the early grades? If you've got lower elementary kids taking online classes, you really need a lot of training, not just for the teacher handling the online classes, but for the facilitator, whether that's a parent or someone else that's meeting with those kids. The global citizenship, this is an area where, you know, for me, this is somewhere where we can also add in, what does global citizenship mean? For example, if we're a faith-based school, you know, is this an area where part of our global citizenship can involve things like servant leadership, or that can involve our mission? These are all aspects of what does a global citizen mean to your school community? And then how do you take that culture? How do you take that mission and that vision for what this means? And how do you put that online? How do you begin to do that? And that's a whole area here where they've got great examples about how you can actually build that citizenry online. But remember that many of us in these organizations that we're online together with today, we have other things that are value-based that would need to go in here. So this is a great example. And now we can begin to add or build upon these examples. Time management, you can never get enough. I think even teachers in the classroom need time management strategies. Can you imagine how they also need to do that in the brick and mortar? And I laugh when I say that, because how many times in a brick and mortar classroom does the teacher ever get to the end of the textbook? And I don't mean I want classes to be textbook driven, but for the most part, teachers don't hit all of the standards or hit all of the topics that they're supposed to cover in any given year. And so on an online environment, it's actually, this is the one area where we can actually probably make sure that everybody gets through all of the topics or all of the standards that we want them to hit. So this is a really, really good use of time and good use of tools. So looking at some of the things that we do in the online world that can translate back over to supporting the teachers and helping teachers in the brick and mortar. Remember, we're building community. And so if you're a school that has a blended approach, or you're a school that has launched a virtual version of yourself, there are still things that can be an asset or support both environments. What does it mean to say the online teacher models digital citizenship? Well, first of all, define what is citizenship to you, and then what is digital citizenship? How does your digital citizenship not only advocate for the appropriate and balanced technology use? Is that, can we infuse our values and stuff in here? And then the last two here are relevant information, communications, and carrying out, any mandates. This is not just local or national laws or mandates for accessibility, but these are also other things that are pertinent to your organization. What do you have that are relevant here that you need to add? In the second standard, then we go into digital teaching, the actual pedagogy. And this is the meat and potatoes, so to speak, for the actual teacher's work. And these are strong, these are research-based again. So how does the teacher support learning? And in these, you've got all kinds of really, really good examples, but notice the skill set. So Mary, who was thrown into online teaching and so on from the classroom during the pandemic, may not have this skill, demonstrate basic troubleshooting skills, and addresses basic technical issues as they arise. Most schools don't have the luxury of an IT person on call 24/7. So can the teacher do this? That may mean you've got to provide enough technical training for your teachers. And the teacher that can barely do their email is not going to be successful in this environment. So maybe they were forced to have Zoom or Google Classroom courses because of the pandemic, but they are not going to thrive as a digital instructor without a lot of support. And so that's where, a lot of people have dropped out of the teaching profession with the nightmare or the PTSD, as they're calling it, of having had to do this because they're just not technical. They would never have voluntarily gone into online instruction because of this. This is a very important aspect, making sure that when we write standards for schools, we're also writing standards that include support for the teacher who will have to support the learning environment.
If I can add one piece there, Trina.
Yeah.
One thing I found here too is I actually had to limit my teachers on what they could actually do with their students as well, because there were certain boundaries you wanted to stop at when it came to teaching a student how to do something with their own equipment. An example would be firewalls. You don't want to get into those areas because then you can get into some major issues. So it's kind of both sides, where you want them to be empowered to support the student, but then also be very judicial about how far they go with that support.
Absolutely. Jim?
Yes, to that same point, for our instructors, they don't necessarily have to troubleshoot everything themselves, but they have to know who they can send the student to for help.
That's right. And so at the end of the day, we just need to have a standard and a way to evaluate that there is a policy or a procedure, not a policy, a procedure, a protocol in place that will support the continuous learning in the online environment. Because, we talked about timing and whether it's how many days. You don't want somebody to lose 5 days of instruction because there was something blocking their progress and the teacher didn't know or the student didn't know. So it's really about putting protocols in place for appropriate procedures. But these give you some great things to think about as you're going through this. Because if you think about why would the teacher need to know this, to your point, Jim, it's, well, the teacher needs to know how or who to go to, not necessarily to be the IT person to support that themselves. The meaningful relationships, the teacher understanding the connection between using tools and building relationships with learners to support their achievements and persistence and so on, and building a meaningful relationship with the learner. This is where I think the pandemic opened up a whole box of interesting conversations here for us. You know, what are the protocols? And I'm just going to throw some things out here for you to be mindful of, that what this is saying is we want the student to build a relationship the way the students would build relationships in brick and mortar, but can the teacher use their personal email to relate with the students? In my mind, absolutely not. You must use everything, I'm going to call it on book, in the platform. But some people do. Some teachers think nothing of using their personal email to shoot off a conversation. Those conversations can get derailed really quickly. We have had instances, and I can think of plenty, but instances where a child threatens suicide online, where, you know, in a conversation, talking to the teacher and just really unloading in that online environment, you know. So what are your safety protocols? Teachers know what to do when they are building relationships and having conversations with kids face to face or in a brick and mortar. They know not to be in a room with a student by themselves. They know, you know, not to keep their doors open. Teachers are well aware of these, don't touch, you know, we've got all these policies and all this practice that we've had for years. The online world is a different world. Things can be misconstrued. Things can be, you know, taken out of context when you text somebody. We've got parents who think nothing of texting teachers on their cell phones and then cutting and pasting, and they just blow up on things because people, you don't have context when you're texting or emailing. And so it's really important that we put safety training in place, that we put safety standards in place that say, you know, not that we want to define or list all of these, but that this relationship building and this community building is different online. We have to acknowledge that, and we have to support the schools in how they support the students, you know, by putting things in play. So David, Jim, anybody that's got online experience, let's talk a little bit about that, because that's where we can trip ourselves up, I think. David, you've got open mic. Oh, no, I was asking. Yeah, go ahead. Any thoughts?
Let's see. Sorry, my dog was distracting me. It's okay. What were you covering for a second?
Don't worry, I don't want to put you on the spot. Jim, maybe.
That's okay. No, that's okay. I have a dog, and I wanted to make sure that I kept him under control before I went on mute. So what was the point we were wanting to talk about, Trina?
Oh yeah, no, we were talking about safety protocols as we build relationships online.
Oh, okay. Yeah, I got it.
Okay. We don't want to be using our personal emails and cell phones.
Right.
We make sure that some of these things are in place, because as a creditor, we want to make sure at least there's a protocol in place so that the teachers know how to respond and who to go to when things happen. I've just asked.
That goes back to kind of what I talked about Monday about communications being clearly documented. Clearly documented, because you want to be able to document and monitor the communications as much as possible between the student and the teachers. Not so much the instruction part, but as you just said, if it's something that gets offline outside of what you would call the instructional content, that is reportable, or that's something that probably should be documented. And then, as you said, where do they go? But one of the things I used to, with my teachers, is I'd say, be very careful about transitioning from instructor to counselor. You want to be very careful about moving into more of a social worker or more of a sounding board for a student, because as you said, they will build relationships with those teachers. And then once they get those relationships, particularly if they have a teacher over time, not just one course, but maybe they have them for English 3 times, and they build that relationship with them, there's just a natural bond depending on the student situation as to what they will begin to feel and then disclose as far as that relationship. And it can get pretty ugly if it isn't controlled.
Thank you. Jim?
Yes, the mental health issue, threatening suicide, things such as that. We just had that come up. I think it was yesterday, and the instructor knew exactly what to do, who to contact, so we could follow up with a live person in the same place where the student was at.
Well, and
We
so,
actually in my previous program did have a person specifically for that purpose, for mental health, for mental health, for the teacher to be able to directly refer that student to, instead of trying to address that issue themselves. I think that's the biggest thing. The teacher understands and knows the avenues to get help or send the student to get help or to report it. It's going to minimize that that want to get deeper involved.
yeah, and I think that the bottom line for us from an accrediting perspective is making sure that the school has those policies in place, that the school has those protocols. And so from our perspective, it will be understanding that there's a standard there that says the online teacher will have a set of policies, procedures, and protocols, and so on. And don't forget, this isn't just kids needing help reaching out, or kids crossing the line in a relationship, emailing and texting the teacher and so on. It's also, this is where we will find the teacher understanding how to respond to online bullying, because kids will do that. They forget they're in a class. They think they're just texting their buddies or people. They'll think it's Facebook or any of the other social platforms. And you need to make sure that all social interactions, there are policies and protocols in place for those. Again, as accreditors, you're not going to probably dictate what those are. You just need to know that the school should have those in their policies and procedures.
You know, let me say one thing, Trina, about social media. When I was still working, I had 10,000 employees that I was responsible for. And I have had to fire a number of teachers over their use of social media with students. And I think it's really important for us to help teachers understand that they're a teacher all the time. They're not a teacher only when they're online with their students, and they can have other behaviors outside of their online presence. And too many times those relationships, you will build relationships online. People say, oh, you can't build the same relationships. Of course you can. And it's important for us to monitor, to make it available to parents to monitor what's going on, so that there's another set of eyes. And the other thing that I'd like to caution you about is helicopter parents that will come in and they'll look you up on social media and then start blasting you on social media because you gave their kid a C in chemistry, and they'll make up stories. And if you respond to those, if you allow your teachers to respond to those, then you get into this vicious cycle. And so there's got to be policies, and the school administration should get involved in those situations, and not the teacher try to handle it themselves. So having those policies, having those protocols will save you an awful lot of headaches and HR time.
Larry, I'm laughing here because you're absolutely right.
Okay.
My sister called me a couple of weeks back. Her child is in 4th grade and in an online class. And they were doing, the teacher does live instruction 3 days a week, and the other 2 days a week, they work on assignments and so on. So she said during the live instruction, she could hear this ruckus going on. Her daughter, she has the kids, sitting at the table where she can see and hear them at all times. And she heard this ruckus going on in the background. And it was a parent who jumped into the live class, even though there were other people's children there, and the parent was screaming at the teacher over a grade in front of all the children. So just know that in the online environment, there are things that you just, in no month of Sundays would a teacher be able to run into a classroom and start screaming in front of other people's children in a physical class. But parents are home, and if kids are taking these classes at home, it's a whole other set of expectations. And so those protocols and policies should be there for parents as well. And so just make sure that schools are aware that, these are inappropriate behaviors even from parents. So it's not just the kids and the teachers. We're now monitoring parent and third-party people who could be sitting listening. And that's where some of the crisis comes in. I think there's a thing here on, let me pull up this actual, here we go. Supporting a safe digital learning space. About privacy and those kind of things. The parent does not have the right to jump into that class and belittle the teacher, belittle the students, because they're now shouting at somebody else's children and causing an unsafe environment in the classroom, because it is a classroom. And it's really important that schools have onboarding. This is all part of the school's onboarding procedures for a family who's taking online classes. It's really important that the parents get an orientation. And so, as part of the online school, does your school have a set of policies for onboarding and for family communicating with families? So those are the kinds of things that we don't even think about it, because, the front office would stop anybody from running into a classroom and screaming at a teacher. You can't do that in the online. So because if the parent's standing there physically in the room with their child.
And that's why having parents sign an acceptable use policy is so important. And there are many of those available on the NCPSA website, or you can just Google acceptable use policies. There's thousands of them out there. It's a must that those parents have to sign that, because that's how you control their behavior.
And it's sad to say we have to control, but we do. We really do. You have to. The world is different today. So if we go down to diverse instruction as well, we're almost at the end here, so I won't go through all of these. But one of the other pieces that's here is understanding that content. If you're in a classroom, you're in a physical classroom, the parent sees a textbook, but they don't always engage in how you're teaching and everything you're doing. In the online world, parents can be standing there or sitting right next to the child, listening to every word the teacher's saying and watching and reviewing every piece of the curriculum that they're seeing. And very often they will have an opinion about what you're teaching and how you're teaching it. And so again, it goes back to that being really strong about what the expectations are for parents, and for a process that if someone has a concern or a question, there's a procedure in place. So putting procedural things into play to avoid parents, just going, like Larry says, sticking on Facebook, screenshots, saying, look at what they're teaching my kid, or recording the teacher without the teacher's permission and saying, listen to what Mrs. So-and-so said. Can you believe this? And a lot of times out of context. So it's an interesting world we're in. Again, these are the online standards for teaching. Down to H. I will stop sharing these. Okay, so we'll just take questions. And on Friday, we'll look at how do you put evaluation rubrics and protocols in place. And then if anybody needs any more help or support, sorry, allergies are killing me this afternoon. Any questions or any thoughts? Anyone who hasn't had a chance to speak? Larry's been gathering the resources and we'll get that out for everybody. We're all good? All right, you have the emails if anybody needs me or needs Larry or any of us, reach out via email. Always happy to help. I will be there in June as well as not June, I keep saying June, it's traditionally June, right? At the end of May. And if anybody wants to dig in and have a look at what they're working on, I'm happy to sit and spend some time with you individually as well.
And
Um,
we will have discussion centering around distance ed at that time too.
All right, Carol, thanks so much. I'm glad you're finding this helpful, everybody. I will see you again, same time, same place on Friday. Look forward to it. Any questions, send them to me in advance, but I'll see you all then. Thanks so much.
See y'all Friday.
So much.
Thank
Thank
you.
you. Thank you.
Thank you.